All right, hey guys, how you doing? I am joined here by Mo Davis, who is running for District 11 in North Carolina for the U.S. House of Representatives. Mo Davis is a retired Air Force colonel, attorney, educator, and something I found really interesting, former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay. How are you doing today?
Doing good, thanks. How are you?
Pretty good. Um, so I was, I did a lot of digging around into your district. I see that you have a guy that was there for quite a while, Meadows, I think, that is retiring now or from Congress, and you're looking to make a bid basically for the seat.
Well, yeah, he recently had a change of duty titles. It's not really a change of his duties, but
Mm-hmm.
his title used to be representative for the 11th Congressional District, and now he's chief of staff to Donald Trump, which is pretty much what he's been doing for the last 3 years. So I'm running to take the seat that he abandoned for Trump.
Sure. Uh, Before we get too far into the specifics of this election, where do you fit on the political spectrum? How do you see
Well, it
yourself?
depends. Yeah, I found that it depends on the audience I'm speaking with.
Yeah.
I can be either the far right neo-Nazi or the far left socialist, depending on the audience, which I think tends to kind of put me in the middle. I think I'm kind of a pragmatic. I'm proud to call myself a progressive. So I think I kind of fall in the middle of the spectrum.
Gotcha. I definitely can empathize with that, depending on who you're talking to. I'm curious, insofar as that goes, who do you talk to on the right, or rather, what conversation you're having on the right that gives you the appearance of being very far left, and then who do you talk to, or what do you talk about on the left that gives you the appearance of being very far right?
Well, on the folks on the far right, that I can't say I've had a whole lot of discussions with them, because I have a hard time having discussions with people that won't accept facts.
Sure.
You just can't reason with people that used to the saying was, I'll believe it when I see it. I think for the folks on the far right, it's I'll see it when I'm told to believe it by Trump or whoever. But so I haven't had a whole lot of discussions, and when I do, it's usually, I don't know if you're familiar with the comic Ron White, but Ron White has a whole routine on "you can't fix stupid."
Sure.
I've learned that Ron is right, and I've kind of quit trying. But I think there are still folks that are conservative that are on the right that aren't, didn't drink the Kool-Aid and join the cult. I refer to them as the old Reagan Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
They believe in the conservative, limited government, fiscal responsibility, strong national defense, and I think there's still a fair number of those folks out there, and those are the ones that I can talk with. And I've been fortunate. I've had a number of Republicans that supporting my campaign, and in this district, that's a necessity, because this is still even after the courts intervened last November and told the legislature to redraw the boundaries because it was clearly heavily gerrymandered for Mark Meadows, but even the redrawn boundaries still lean Republican. So, and then on the other side, on the liberal side, pretty much anyone that calls themselves a progressive. I was on last night on a Zoom session, and I had 5 young folks from around the district on, and they're big believers in a guaranteed basic income and Medicare for all, and some policies that are a little further left than mine. So I don't seem to have too much trouble finding folks that are either to my left or my right.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious, because I was looking at, in terms of your background, and then in looking at how wide the margin was when Meadows was running in this district, because it was huge. I know there's a lot of different things that go into here. So, for instance, recently the boundaries were redrawn. I don't know if that's enough that you would say, like, oh, well, Democrats can win easily now. I'm sure it's still like an uphill fight. Why? You've kind of answered this there. Why run as a Democrat instead of a Republican? Do you feel like you align so strongly with the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party that you could never see yourself doing it? Or I'm kind of curious from that point of view.
Yeah, I just don't believe in, I think you ought to say what you mean and, stand behind it. And so it's like, a lot of folks in a primary will take one position, and then when it's the general election, then they'll pivot. And I don't believe in doing that. I think you got to tell people what you believe, and if they like it, fine. If they don't, then don't try to pretend you're something you're not. Mm-hmm. And I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I've always been proud to be a Democrat. And I think I more closely align with Democratic beliefs than I do with Republican beliefs. But which is not to say, though, that I'm, if you folks that know me, I'm pretty fiscally. I don't think fiscally conservative is the right term. I think fiscally responsible is the term I like to use. I think we just waste a huge amount of money that we could spend more, effectively and get better things done. So, you're right. I mean, it's still a Republican-leaning district. When Meadows was here, if you looked at his races, I mean, he won some 20, 25, nearly 30 points.
Yeah.
Under the new boundaries, I know some folks look at the new district and they try to overlay the Trump-Clinton 2016 results. And they go, well, it's still a 16 or 17 point Republican district. I don't think that's the accurate comparison. In 2016, we also had our governor here in North Carolina, Roy Cooper, who's a Democrat, ran against the then governor, Pat McCrory, who was a Republican. And I think that's a more analogous race to the race now. And if you overlaid their results over the new district boundaries, the Republican McCrory won by about 6.5 points. So that's kind of, in my thinking, that's kind of the obstacle I've got to overcome is about a 6.5 or a 7 point deficit.
Gotcha. When you say fiscally responsible, so especially people on the left, the hairs on their neck will stand when they hear things like that. I noticed from your website, you talk about like supporting single payer healthcare, and I know that you talk about like a living wage for North Carolina. One of the historic questions that's brought up, even from one Democrat to another, is, well, how are you going to pay for these things? Right. Do you address that, or do you have like responses prepared for people that question those measures?
Yeah, my background was, after law school, when I joined the Air Force, the Air Force sent me back to school twice to get a master's of law, which, a JD is kind of like getting an MD. You learn a little bit about a lot, but not a lot about any one thing in particular. And so you can go back to school for another year and get a master's of law where you spend a year focused on a specific area. And so I went back twice and got a master's of law in government procurement and fiscal policy. And I taught fiscal law. So what I'm saying when I say I'm fiscally responsible is I would like to see a reorientation of our fiscal approach. And a good example is our military budget. And I'm a career military guy. I'm not anti-military, but we spend $750 billion, which, it's just a fact that that's as much as the next 10 countries behind us combined. And it doesn't make us any more safe and secure than it does other countries. And our approach has always been top down, where I can tell you, like in the military and when I worked for Congress, the military often, was told you were going to buy, this, something the military didn't ask for, didn't want, didn't need, doesn't contribute to national security, but some member of Congress pushed through
appropriated funds.
Yeah, billions of dollars worth of stuff that the military doesn't need and didn't want, that they're forced to buy. Anybody that's ever served in government knows, that the fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. And in September, there's this mad spending spree to try to spend every penny in your budget on the theory, if you don't use it all this year, it's a clear indication you don't need it next year. And so, I was in organizations where things were bought that, we didn't need to do it to perform our mission. So what I'm proposing is a reorientation of our approach, where you define the requirements of the agency and then build the budget up from there, rather than having it dictated from the top down, which is a huge waste of money. So I think, like on our defense budget, I think we can make a significant cut to the budget, still have the strongest military in the world, and reallocate that money to things like healthcare and education and broadband that make a day-to-day difference in people's lives around here. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about being fiscally responsible.
Have you?
And, you mentioned single payer. We spend on average, $11,000 per person per year in America on healthcare. Yet we had 30 million people that had no coverage before COVID-19. We had 40 million people that were underinsured. And then with COVID-19, those numbers have only gone up. If you look at our peer, countries we consider our allies and our peers spend on average about half that amount. And in those countries, everyone has health care coverage. So again, I'm not saying let's spend more. I think we can spend less and cover more by being, like right now with private insurance, about on average, 30 cents of every dollar goes to administrative costs. So I just think we can be a lot more sensible in the way we spend our money and achieve a lot better results.
Sure. Have you spoken at any live events? Is that even possible right now with the COVID-19 stuff and everything going on? Do you guys have like town hall related stuff or anything like that?
Yeah, I wish. I mean, it's really been I thought on March 3rd when we had the primary, and I won on the Democratic side, the Republicans ended up in a runoff. It'll be decided on June 23rd. I thought, boy, I've got a big advantage. I can be out beating the bushes, while they're still fighting amongst themselves. And then the next week, is when we started hearing about COVID-19, and our whole plan went out the window. So I don't have an advantage or a disadvantage over other campaigns. Everyone's had to try to adapt. So we've been doing twice a week, Mondays from 12:30 to 1:30, and Thursday night from 7 to 8, doing Zoom sessions. Started out just Zoom, then went to FaceTime Live and Twitter Live, and now on Snapchat and a variety of different platforms. And we're getting, it varies 3, 4, 5, 6,000 people a week or per session that are watching. Again, that's not the perfect solution. Particularly, we have a lot of our counties here in Western North Carolina. Out further west, broadband access is 50% or less. Nationwide, it's about 92%. We have counties where it's under 50%. So, doing things like this or Zoom sessions, I can't reach people over the internet if they don't have internet. So we still got that challenge of how do you reach those people? And I'm hoping at some point we'll get to go back to more traditional type of campaigning. But our numbers here in North Carolina are creeping up. So, we're in phase 2 of a 3-phase, re-entry program. And right now the numbers just aren't looking real good on advancing into the next phase.
You mentioned the positions that you have seem like they would make you really unpopular in a largely Republican district, or you'd be fighting an uphill battle. So when you're talking about cutting military spending, single-payer healthcare, living wage, these are really strong Democrat talking points. When you're talking to a largely Republican audience, what angle of attack do you use, or how do you make these positions more palatable towards a more conservative voter base?
One of the things I've argued back when we could still get out was just look around you. Are you better off than you were 8 years ago when Mark Meadows took office? Because, the fact is that there's 17 counties that make up this district. All 17 counties, the percentage of people without health care coverage was above the national average before COVID-19. There are 14 of the 17 counties. The poverty rate was above the national average before COVID-19. Now, we mentioned broadband. Broadband access was significantly lower here than it is across the country as a whole. Education-wise, when I grew up in North Carolina, we were really proud of our good school system. Kids in our rural schools now rank in the bottom third of the country in math and reading skills. I mean, those are all just facts. So what I'm trying to encourage people to do is an honest assessment. Look around you and ask yourself, are you satisfied with what you've gotten over the last 8 years with Mark Meadows in office and the last 3 with Donald Trump? And what I'm asking them to do is give me 22 months. If I win the election on November 3rd, I'll get sworn in on January 3rd of 2021, and I'll face the voters again 22 months later. So what I'm asking, give me 22 months, and if I don't live up to my, the thing I said, if I let you down, hunt me down, because vote me out. I mean, that's your duty. Vote me out in 22 months. But, if you look at what Mark Meadows has done over the last 3 years, it's been to defend Donald Trump full time. Go back to his Twitter feed and take a look. He never mentions Western North Carolina. It's defending Trump. So I want to focus on issues that I think matter on a day-to-day basis here, and that's healthcare, education, poverty, the environment, and broadband.
You have quite a history of public service in terms of, I guess, education, law, your time serving as a chief prosecutor, Air Force. Why, at this point, what drove you to think that you need to run for office, or like why? What
Yeah,
was the motivation right now to do it, and then why House of Representatives versus maybe something more local or something different?
yeah, that's a great question. As you can see, I'm here in Asheville. We're in a rental house right now. My wife and I are having a house built.
Mm-hmm.
Then actually, I think Monday we can actually start moving in after 16 months of effort. But we moved. I grew up in North Carolina, moved away. We moved here last May, and I was at the time I was a judge at the Department of Labor. And when I moved here, I had a couple of months of writing up some decisions. And so on September the 6th of last year, I finished my work and packed my stuff up and shipped it to Washington. And I thought I was retired at that point because of the gerrymandering. I was in the part of this district that I don't know if you're familiar with Asheville. Asheville is a very progressive, yeah.
They just got drawn into the district, I believe, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I've described Asheville as the Berkeley of the Blue Ridge.
Sure.
If you picked up Berkeley, flew it across the country, dropped it in the Appalachian Mountains, you'd have Asheville. Mm-hmm. And so what the Republicans had done was to dilute the effect of that concentration of blue votes. They split Asheville down the middle and put half in the district that Mark Meadows represented, the 11th, and the other half in the 10th district, which was Patrick McHenry. And it made it, it was a mathematical impossibility for a Democrat to win either one of those districts. Mm-hmm. So September, I thought I was retired. In November, the latter part of November is when our state courts intervened. If you recall June of last year is when the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, in a case involving North Carolina and Maryland, had ruled that partisan gerrymandering didn't run afoul of the U.S. Constitution. And so I'd kind of written it off at that point, that there'd be nothing done about gerrymandering until after the census, when the lines got redrawn, as they do every decade. Mm-hmm. So, in September, October, November, I thought I was retired. And then the latter part of November, the state court intervened and said under the state constitution, it ran afoul of equal protection there. And they told our legislature to either you redraw it or we'll do it for you. And it became apparent as the legislature began to meet, there were different iterations of the map, but every version put Asheville and Buncombe County back together, because you really can't explain why you split Asheville down the middle by any reason other than cheating.
Gerrymandering, yeah.
Yeah, there was, I don't know if they still do it. There was a 5K or a 10K race that ran the boundary. At UNC Asheville, depending on which dormitory you lived in, you could either be in the 10th district or the 11th, because they literally just split the campus down the middle. And so in November, when late November, it became apparent they were going to put this, the blue votes back together, it's mathematically, like you said, it's still a Republican-leaning district, but it's not insurmountable. And I looked at who was running. At the time, Mark Meadows had announced he was not going to run. And I looked at the Democrats that were running. They were good people. Their heart was in the right place. But I didn't see anybody I thought had the wherewithal to garner the resources and the attention and the effort that it would take to beat Mark Meadows, even with the new boundaries. And so that's when I looked at it and I thought, crap, I've got 25 years in uniform and other 5+ years either working on Capitol Hill or in a robe at the Department of Labor. And I got 30+ years invested in democracy, and I'm not going to sit back and watch it go down the drain. So I kind of figured, if not me, who? Mm-hmm. And so that's when I chose to get in, and I was really fortunate. At the time I got in, it was 15 weeks until the primary, and some of the other folks have been running for 15 months, and I didn't know if I could make up the ground, the time, advantage that they had. But thanks to the efforts of a lot of folks who got on board and spread the word, I ended up in a 5-person race getting 47.5% of the vote and won pretty handily. So now it's on to the general election, and hopefully we can do that again there.
Yeah, I think just as an aside, I like the idea of more military people running on the Democratic tickets, because it seems like for whatever reason, somehow Republicans got like a monopoly on military people. So that's always good too.
Well, and we've got some other great candidates here in North Carolina. Cal Cunningham running for the Senate against Tom Tillis. And Cal is a Army veteran, and is leading in the polls. So Governor Cooper, I think, is done well in handling COVID-19, and he's caught a lot of flack. The Republicans now are going to pack up their convention and take it to Jacksonville from Charlotte. But I'm really pleased with on the ticket. It's going to be Joe Biden. The batting order is Joe Biden, Cal Cunningham, me, and then Roy Cooper. So I'm pretty happy with the teammates I've gotten. I'm pretty happy to be batting third. And I'm really happy that Cal, right ahead of me in the number 2 position, is another veteran who I think is a guy with you got a good head on his shoulders.
Nice, yeah. What do you think is the general feeling on the ground in North Carolina about, I guess, like Trump's leadership or how he's handled the country through crisis after crisis after crisis? I guess it's been an eventful 4 years, but especially as of recently with the riots and the COVID-19 stuff. Do you feel like there's still like a really strong, large Republican base that will support Trump no matter what? Do you think that there's people at the edges that are kind of wavering, or what's the general feeling of that in North Carolina?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to try to stereotype the entire state. The state they're pretty much, if you're familiar with North Carolina, they're kind of like distinct regions of the state. The western part here in the mountains is significantly different than the coast, for example, the Outer Banks. Mm-hmm. And then in between, you got the Sand Hill area down around Fayetteville and Fort Bragg, and then the Piedmont, Charlotte, and Greensboro, Winston-Salem, that area. I'd say here in this district, there's still a hardcore Trump base that is going to be there. They're going to turn out. They're going to vote. To be honest, I always knew those people were there. I underestimated the size of that group. Yeah. I always knew that there was a 10 or 15%, kind of a narrow-minded, bigoted faction. I didn't realize it was bigger than that. Mm-hmm. So I think they're still there, but I think there are a lot of other, like I described before, the old Reagan Republicans that are offended by the conduct. It amazes me. I go to the VA. There's an excellent VA hospital here in Nashville. That's where I go. Mm-hmm. It's where my dad was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II. That's where he went. And it always amazes me when I go there and I see Trump stickers and MAGA hats. And because, Trump is pretty much everything that the military is not. Beginning with, taking responsibility for yourself. He's never, you remember the statement he made not long ago is when somebody asked him, do you take responsibility, for what's happened with COVID-19? He said, no, not at all. So I was pleased yesterday, General Milley, when he came out, with his statement saying, he takes responsibility, made a mistake by going out, after they cleared Lafayette Park up in D.C. But I'm always amazed that folks, I think one of the things I'm counting on here in this district, there are 65,000 veterans in this district. And the majority of those are Republicans. But I think a big issue here is saving the VA. Trump and the Republicans want to privatize the VA. One of the opponents on the Republican side, the one that's endorsed by Trump, has said she supports his efforts to extend private healthcare options for veterans, which is just code for privatizing the VA. Yeah. So I think there is a lot of support. You see a lot of stickers around here, Save Our VA. And it's going to be, I'm committed to that. The Republicans aren't. So I think I can reach those folks that are still sensible, that still believe in, the VA and military values, that are offended by, what they've seen out of the commander-in-chief. It's really shocking. I don't think, people didn't sign up to take up arms against their fellow Americans. And
for sure. It always blows my mind that one of the big things Trump ran on was like a businessman. It was supposed to be one of his big selling points. And, part of being a CEO or a manager or a supervisor or anything is that like the buck stops with you. Yeah. And man, we still hear, about Obamagate. I'm not sure if we found out what that is yet. Or how
Hillary's emails.
Yeah, Hillary's emails. Yeah. And it's like we're so many years now into it. It's like at what point, are you going to take responsibility for everything? In terms of like prior Defense Secretary Mattis's or previous Defense Secretary Mattis's statements against Trump. Do you think that there's like an obligation for people involved in defense or in the military or former government officials to come out and make statements regarding like the current precedent? Do you think that sets a bad precedent, or do you think that there's like an obligation to your country or constitution, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a tough, it's a personal decision that those folks have to make, and it's a tough call. I mean, it's, I think now it's more acute than, like the decision I made when I was chief prosecutor.
Yeah.
There's a point, like people say, well, why did you stay, as long as you did? And I think I'm hoping that a lot of the folks that are still around are staying because they believe that they can make it better than the person that they would be replaced with. That, they're trying to, at least in my perspective, I was trying to stay there and try to keep us on as even a keel as I could, knowing that if I left, the person coming in behind me was likely to be someone picked for not having that perspective. Mm-hmm. So I think there are folks in government still like that now that are looking at it saying, I think under the belief that they can do more good from the inside than from the outside. Mm-hmm. But there comes a point, like eventually it did for me, when you just have to say, I can't in good conscience continue to do this and quit. And we've seen a number of folks that have done that. And certainly after you quit, then you are freed up to express what you believe. Yeah. I mean, I agree that folks that are on active duty, we were always nonpartisan. We're there to, there were presidents that I liked and agreed with, and there are presidents that I didn't necessarily like. But you serve, the commander in chief, whoever it is. And I think we've got one now where I think it really is pushing the line on when some folks just have to say enough is enough and I quit. Mm-hmm.
I really wish it was easier for more people. Like I respect people that after the fact will come out and say, like this person is, not good for the country, not good for the Constitution. I wish it was easier for people in government to step up and speak out sometimes. I know that you have personal experience with that. Or I guess you can speak more to that if you want, where you'd penned an op-ed that you felt got you fired from the Foreign Affairs, Defense and Trade Commission mm-hmm. division. Yeah. When you were working for Congress, I guess. It seems really hard sometimes for people in government to step up and speak out, whether if we're talking about like whistleblower protections or if we're talking about people being critical of the president, especially now. Man, anytime somebody steps out against Trump, it seems like they're either getting fired or he's going to be bullying them the next day on Twitter. It's an insane environment right now. Jeez.
Yeah, it is. It was tough back a decade, 12 years ago, when I quit. Mm-hmm. I didn't do it lightly. I thought it through, and I knew what the likely consequences were going to be. And, I kind of looked at it and thought, if I didn't do it, who was going to do it? Because I had younger folks working for me on the prosecution team that, were concerned as well, but they still had, families to feed and a career ahead of them. And, I looked at it and thought, crap, I'm a colonel. What are they going to do? Make me retire? There are worse things than being a retired colonel. Mm-hmm. And so I chose to do it. But I've told people, when you're in that situation, you've got to think it through. It's kind of like jumping on a grenade. You can't jump on every one of them.
Yeah.
You got to pick and choose the ones you're going to jump on, and you can't expect there's going to be anybody standing there to catch you when you fall. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're walking out on that limb by yourself, and you're sawing it off, and there may not be anybody with you when you do it. So it's got to be you got to think through the decision. But it's gotten worse. I mean, you've seen recently where Trump, fires the IGs. Even, like when I was around during the Bush administration, no one ever could have imagined that the Bush administration would just fire inspector generals. So there was, at least I knew there were some safeguards in place.
A really uncomfortable relationship between like Trump and like Barr and everything with the DOJ. Everything is very, very strange right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's really, you really are, those folks that are thinking about speaking up, they really do have to think through the consequences. And I think the consequences today are significantly different than they were for me a dozen years ago.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that in all your time, like serving as a judge and with your background in law, do you have a unique perspective on everything going on right now with the defund the police, abolish the police, reform the police? Do you have any opinions or anything like that? Is that a central part of your campaign right now because of everything that's gone on recently? What do you think about everything, that movement right now in the United States, I guess?
Yeah, I wish they'd have picked a different slogan other than defund. We're really bad about it. You got to give the other side credit. They're great at coming up with bumper stickers, where my side tends to be great at writing position papers that nobody reads.
Yeah.
So they're really good at like vilifying like Obamacare or the Green New Deal, or now with this, defund the police. I don't disagree with the underlying premise, but the label is really not doing anyone any favors.
Yeah.
And the other side, Trump and everybody else has jumped on it. I think there's certainly, my undergraduate degree was in criminal justice, and I worked in law enforcement training for the state of North Carolina before I went to law school. So it's kind of like when I said I'm not anti-military, I'm not anti-law enforcement either, but there is significant room for reform and improvement and rethinking policing. One of the things, and that's one of those topics we could talk about for hours, but, part of my platform that I've been running on, and all the other Democrats did too, is like the legalization of marijuana and expunging records of folks that have been convicted. So I would like to see us get out of, I think there are a lot of things we treat as a law enforcement legal issue that should be treated as a health issue, like addiction. There's, the opioid problem is fairly acute here as it is in many parts of the country. And I think our approach to treating that as a criminal issue rather than a health issue is the wrong approach. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to rethink policing and law enforcement and how everything links together in today's environment. And you mentioned, I got off on a tangent before, you're talking about the mood in North Carolina. One thing that's encouraging that I didn't expect. I mean, we've had protests here in Asheville, and that's not surprising. But there've been Black Lives Matters protests in Murphy and Bryson City and Franklin. Towns that I certainly wouldn't have bet money that you'd be seeing those kind of things in places like that. You saw this week where NASCAR. This is we're kind of here in NASCAR country, and NASCAR banning Confederate flags. It just seems like there's something in the air that hadn't been there when these kinds of situations have come up in the past. So I hope I'm not being a Pollyanna about this, but I'm hopeful that this is an inflection point where, Mike, I'm 61, and over the course of my life, it seems like the pendulum swings to extremes.
Yeah.
And I hope we've swung to the far right extreme, and now we're swinging back towards a more sensible middle. And so I hope this is an opportunity that we can seize on to make things better. I mean, remember the founding fathers said the objective was a more perfect union, not the perfect union. So we are a perpetual work in progress, and we've got work to do.
Yeah, I've heard the idea of the American pendulum going back and forth between administrations and political phases, but man, I'm getting whiplash from Obama to Trump is pretty extreme, and then potentially from like Trump to Biden, it would be like another really extreme swing back. From a domestic point of view, I guess it's kind of interesting or funny or humorous. From an international point of view, it feels like it would severely undermine America, for better or for worse, sits on top of the world, in the Western world, in terms of leadership. And when your leadership is like so diametrically opposed every 4 to 8 years, it seems like a really unreliable partner to have, I guess, on an international level.
And that's one of my big concerns. I don't know that I'll live long enough to see us undo the damage we've done internationally. We spent decades after World War. We came out of World War II as the world leader, and we led efforts to do things like create the UN and NATO and the International Criminal Court and the Geneva Conventions and the Convention Against Torture, and all these things that we led the effort to create. And we spent the last number of years undermining everything that we advocated for. And I think it's going to take a long, long time to undo the harm that's been done. Particularly the thing that really offends me, and I think it offends a lot of other veterans, is abandoning the Kurds. They were in Syria fighting ISIS for us. They died and spilled blood for us, and then Trump just cuts them off at the knees and walks away. So I don't know, why another country, another group would say, "Hey, let's link arms with America. We're in this together." When we have shown that we'll leave you high and dry. So, but we've got to start the effort, and that's one reason I'm running. I want to be part of the effort to get us back to where we need to be. Back to Reagan used to talk about being a shining city on a hill. Well, we've got to start that effort to try to live up to that ideal that that we espoused for so long.
This is kind of a personal, blunt question. Being involved in the military, does it bother you how little Americans seem to care about foreign policy? Unless it's literally like sending troops over to a place, it seems like we have it's just not popular positions to run on anything related to foreign policy decisions.
Yeah, it's disappointing. And if you do foreign travel, folks in a lot of other places are a lot more knowledgeable about the world than a lot of folks here are. We've kind of got this elitist attitude that, by God, we're going to speak English. And if you don't like it, then, get the hell out. But it's funny because people that like now there's this big, one of my opponents on the Republican side keeps talking about, she's all on board with the China virus and the Wuhan flu, the whole stoking that thing. And a lot of folks here buy that, but they also love going to Walmart and getting that big screen TV for $599.
Yeah, you say one thing, but your wallet definitely points to another direction for sure. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of apathy and ignorance about, foreign policy is, a deep subject. And there aren't a lot of people willing to put in the work to really understand it. But I'm a big believer. That's one of the things too with me. Like I said, I think we could cut back on our military budget and still be the strongest military in the world. But I think what we need to be focused on the diplomatic side. We don't put enough effort into the military should be the last option, not the first. And we need a bigger investment in diplomacy because, like it or not, the world we live in, we can't build a wall around America and be self-sustaining. We're dependent. We're interdependent with folks around the globe. And we need to figure out how to do that effectively or, we're going to suffer. We're going to, we're on the brink now of not being the world leader that we have been.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see us get back to being the country that we used to claim we were.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of parallels between that and policing too. And you kind of mentioned that earlier with, this was one of my frustrations with Defund the Police is that typically if you talk to people who are talking about defunding the police, usually the positions are actually really reasonable. Like, oh, well, I think that we should allocate, less money to police and more to like social workers that could be called to deal with mentally ill people rather than showing up, with police in full Kevlar and AR-15s to, deal with a guy that has schizophrenia, wandering in the street. It seems like not a good thing. It seems like, I guess as America, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policing, we escalate to like the highest level of whatever we can very quickly, which is pretty troubling sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that's why I wish they'd come up with, reimagine policing or, some other title than defund it, because certainly the perception is that, if you're a Democrat, that you hate the police.
Yeah.
And it's not that we do. I think the vast majority of police are good, honest, hardworking American people. But, it's clearly evident that we've got significant room for improvement.
Yeah,
so,
for sure. For your campaign, what do you think are the like 2 or 3 main things that you want to get done? If you win the election, you go to Congress, what are like the 2 or 3 big things? Maybe one like domestic national policy and then one like for North Carolina policy. What are like the few big things that you'd like to gun for?
Well, I think, to me, and I've made this clear throughout the primary, and it's even more true today, is there are a huge number of policy issues that are critically important. But I think issue number one is restoring, shoring up the foundation of our democracy, with honesty and integrity and accountability. Because I think right now we've got cracks in our foundation, and until we fix those, then the other things are secondary. So I want to, Congress is, I believe in the Constitution the way it's written, that we have three co-equal branches of government, and Congress is given up on their responsibility to be a check and balance on the executive branch. So I'd like to see us get back to where honesty and integrity and government ethics means something.
I'm kind of curious in terms of that shoring up and then talking about Congress. How do you feel about some positions that are being floated, such as completely getting rid of the filibuster in the Senate or packing the courts, putting more Supreme Court justices than 9 onto the courts as president as well? Do you have opinions on like either of these things?
Yeah, I've talked about that, and that's what I like with the courts. I've said if they can pollute it, we can dilute it. Mm-hmm. There's no magic to 9 on the Supreme Court, and there's no constitutionally required number of federal judges. So if they're gonna, a lot of the folks, and I hate to stereotype everyone, because I'm sure there's some good apples in the bunch, mm-hmm. but there are a lot of folks that clearly are unqualified, that are young, that'll be around for decades on the court. So, and you can't fire them unless they engage in some type of criminal misconduct, which they're not likely to do. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not opposed to trying to dilute the effect if that's the game they're going to play, and try to, my big fear is what's going to happen between November 3rd and January 20th.
Assuming that Trump loses, or
if Trump loses, he's still in office from November 3rd till January the 20th. The current Congress will be there until January 3rd. So they've got 60 days of the Mitch McConnell Senate and a few more days, with Trump in office. And I hate to think what they will try to do during that lame duck
This
period.
Is a kind of conspiratorial. I have a few bets out with friends. If Trump loses, do you think he would actually try to stay? Do you think he would do some weird, crazy, argue that the election was invalid, try to deploy the military to maintain control of the White House? Is this ever possible, or do you think that's a little bit too fantastical?
I don't know. I've gotten to the point where I quit trying. When people say, "What do you think's going to?" I found that I'm wrong as often as I'm right.
Sure.
It's like every day. I know. Before I moved down here, I was working in Washington, and my colleagues and I would sit around and talk and say, "My God, it can't get any worse than this."
Yeah, we've been saying that a lot over the past 4 years. Yeah.
That's like, I remember, my wife and I were big fans of House of Cards.
Yeah.
But, it got to where House of Cards couldn't compete with the insanity of reality, mm-hmm. and of what was taking place in the White House. So would he do that? I hope not, but hell, I wouldn't put it past him. Sure. He has exceeded, every boundary that, I thought was out there. He has jumped over. So,
yeah, I remember even when he was running, there were so many things that came out where as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, well, it's been fun. But there's no way that Trump survives the leaked tape, about women and celebrities. There's no way that he survives calling McCain, saying that he liked people that weren't captured to the Republican Party. There's no way that he survives it. But yeah, he's very tenacious. So I'll give him that at the very least. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, the hard part to explain is, I'm not, Trump is Trump. He hadn't changed his, people say, well, he'll become more president. He's still the same guy, self-serving con man that he's always been. What's really surprised me more than his conduct are people like Lindsey Graham that I've known. My first trial I ever did was in 1984 in the Air Force, and my opponent was a young captain from South Carolina named Lindsey Graham. Mm-hmm. And what shocks me more are people like him that have just, bent over for Trump. Mm-hmm. Lindsey Graham and John McCain, back when I was the chief prosecutor, they were the two guys that were standing up against the Bush administration. And to see some of these folks just throw in the towel is really been shocking.
Yeah. Do you think that there are unique issues that face North Carolina that the rest of the country doesn't necessarily have to worry about?
We've got some, like I mentioned, broadband. Mm-hmm. Clearly, the state of North Carolina as a whole is about 94% of homes have access to broadband. So we're actually a couple of points ahead of the national average. But this part of North Carolina, is far behind. So, I think it was Jim Clyburn I heard one day last week talking about how it impacts rural areas and minority communities in particular. Mm-hmm. And he was saying we need an effort kind of like the rural electrification effort back decades ago to bring electricity to those underserved areas. We need an effort like that for broadband. And I think he put a price tag on, I think, of $88 billion, which, used to seem like a lot of money until, lately we tend to kick around, trillions fairly cavalierly. So I think it can be done. But that's an area, one thing that's surprising, I don't think a lot of people give North Carolina credit for, we're number 2 in the country in solar energy production behind California. So that's one of the, again, kind of went off on a tangent. Your question earlier about policies that I'd like to see, I talked about trying to shore up the foundation of our democracy, but economically, like I said, this area is high in poverty. Mm-hmm. We're particularly impacted with COVID-19. This area is tourism driven. So, tourism, when there's a crisis, tourism is the first thing to go and the last thing to come back. So we've got a lot of people that are going to continue to struggle economically. So I would like to see us make this the epicenter for green technology. Like I said, we're number 2 in solar energy production. The house my wife and I are moving into next week, we put in solar. So I'd like to see us ramp up the effort in these high poverty counties to not only put solar in homes and make it economically feasible, but to, solar jobs. The panels we put on our house are made in America, but they're not made here in Western North Carolina. So I think there's a real opportunity to capitalize on our, the green wave that's kind of taking hold here in Western North Carolina. Mm-hmm. So I think we've got a real opportunity. One of the things too that talk about how do I win Republican votes, as I said, this area is heavily dependent on tourism, and our biggest draw are our national parks and national forests. In fact, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park is the most visited national park in the country. And, the Republicans have repeatedly cut the budget for the Park Service and the Forest Service. And they're laying off and firing, letting people go. So that's another area where this area is going to suffer. We're eroding that, the epicenter of our economy is tourism, and we're underfunding and eroding support for our parks and forests. So it's another area where I think we can employ people, give them meaningful work and a decent living, and it'd be good for the economy and the environment as well.
Yeah. In a post-NAFTA world, we get a lot of complaints in the United States that certain states got disproportionately hit, losing manufacturing jobs. And now as we're moving towards more green energy, there are a lot of states whose economies revolve, or a lot of workers at least, are involved in like fossil fuel industry. One of the challenges that I've seen of the Democratic Party, and a question I ask oftentimes, is how do you reconcile the difference in interests between people that are pushing for green energy versus like fossil fuel workers? The AFL-CIO represents a lot of, union workers that work in fossil fuel plants and everything. And these people feel like their jobs are threatened by the existence of green energy. How do you address their concerns?
Yeah, well, I think it's, it's kind of like back in, there were a lot of folks worked in buggy whip manufacturing at one point, and then the car came along. So I think it's, it's this notion that, clean coal, and we're going to continue, fossil fuel is going to continue to be our primary source of energy. One bit of good news in 2020, and I guess, I'd mentioned the other day that I remember at the end of New Year's Eve in 2019, I remember thinking, thank God 2019 is over.
A lot of people said that, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I should have been more specific because 2020 hadn't had a lot of good news so far. But one bit of good news is we're on track for this to be the first year in our history where non-carbon energy is going to exceed carbon-based energy in producing electrical power. So that's a good trend, and I think it's one that's going to continue. Like the power plants that have switched to natural gas or solar or wind aren't doing it necessarily because they're environmentalists. They're doing it because it's economical.
Mm-hmm.
They can run their plants cheaper on those energy sources than they can on coal.
Yeah.
So I know the coal industry, the biggest part of my job when I was a judge at the Department of Labor, we're doing black lung hearings for coal miners up in Southwest Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky. And then down here in North Carolina, here in Asheville, there's a big debate over a Duke power plant that just converted from coal to natural gas. And there's a huge issue about what do you do with all this coal ash that's accumulated. So I've seen the coal industry from extracting it in West Virginia to coal ash sitting here in Asheville. And it's a dirty, nasty business from start to finish. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy that there are 7 people working in solar energy for every 1 working in coal mining. So I'd like to see us, those folks are, I know they're have a great appreciation for coal mining. I knew nothing about coal mining when I became a judge. So those are guys here in the eastern part of the country. Most of the coal mines are like 30 to 36 inch coal seams. So these are guys that spent their decades on their hands and knees. They couldn't stand up, mm-hmm. In a coal mine, sucking in coal dust. But that industry is not coming back. I think the country's moved on. And so I think what we can do is help them and their families adapt to the future rather than trying to cling to the past. Mm-hmm. So there's one thing I'm pleased about. I know up in coal country, when I was there, often I would have the hearings at community colleges. And it was really, I was really pleased to see that there had been significant investments in community colleges where the younger generation were getting degrees in nursing, in IT, in things that there is a future, and not following daddy and granddaddy into the coal mines. So, I think it's just, you're fighting the tide if you believe that we're going to continue in a carbon-based energy environment. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for alternative energy, and we ought to be helping folks transition to that and help them get the training they need to take advantage of those good jobs that are out there in alternative energy.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any opinions on nuclear energy? I don't know if there are nuclear reactors in North Carolina or not.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any in the immediate vicinity. Mm-hmm. I think I think wind and solar are much, obviously much, unless you believe President Trump that windmills cause cancer. So that, sure. But I think they're better alternatives, with wind and solar and some of the other technologies. I think one of the things I'm really big on, well, 2 things. One before I forget it again. You're talking about how do we appeal to conservatives on like green technology. Mm-hmm. One of those is on national security, because if you can make your energy on the roof of your house, then we don't need to send troops to the Middle East to guard pipelines and shipping lanes. So green technology is good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's good for our national security. Mm-hmm. So I think we can reach people if you can hit them on their pocketbook issues and their national security beliefs, that there's an opportunity to win some of those folks over.
Okay. What's your? I guess you guys have you gotten a chance to do any door knocking at all, or is that completely just not possible right now?
Yeah, not lately. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've we're in phase 2 of the 3-step reentry thing, and we've had a chance to go out to a couple of events that have been outdoors, where folks wore face mask and stayed apart. But mm-hmm. you can't do the big events that the things that we kind of imagined we'd be doing in June. we're not doing, and I don't know if we're going to be able to. I mean, I know Trump is hell bent on having his Klan rallies and his convention, but I'm just not seeing that being feasible in the near term.
Gotcha. Okay. Assuming you can talk to like a voter in your district, I mean, what's like your 2-minute sales pitch for your campaign? Like in terms of why you think you're effective enough to run in Congress and effective enough to pass meaningful legislative change for North Carolina, or at least represent it on, the floor of the House.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the pitch I'm making, I'm a native North Carolinian, and I grew up in this state when we were a proud, progressive, forward-leaning state that had good roads and good schools. And we had Research Triangle Park before anybody ever heard of Silicon Valley. So we were kind of the envy of the South, and we spent the last decade rolling back the clock. Mm-hmm. So the things that are important, I think, to folks around here, those day-to-day issues like the environment, the economy, schools, broadband, and healthcare. And if you look at the other side, they're running on three things: their loyalty to Trump, their love of guns, and their hatred for abortion. Those are not day-to-day issues that are impacting folks here in Western North Carolina. So what I'm asking is, give me 22 months and let's see if we can't get us on the right track and make an improvement in the future for you and your kids. And if I don't, then fire me and put somebody else in the job. But people here have been persuaded for too long, either by an appeal to their religious duty, their patriotic duty to vote against their own interest. And it's time they start voting in their interest. And we can do a lot better than we've been doing if we try rowing together rather than rowing apart.
Cool. Sounds good. Do you have, what's like the main hub for you guys in terms of if you could direct everybody to one area? Would it be the website you guys are using, or do you have like, what's your biggest social media account? Or?
Yeah, the website is modavisforcongress.com, and that's kind of the focal point. That, like I said, we've been trying to branch out as much as we can through Twitter. I've got a fairly significant Twitter following, about 157,000 followers on Twitter. Facebook, I think we've got 2,500, 3,000 followers there. I'm on some platforms now that I'm not sure exactly what they are and how they work, but there are folks, working on the campaign that tell me they're really important to segments of the district, and so we're trying to reach people every way that we can safely. Because my big fear, this has certainly been a unpleasant experience for everyone, this whole lockdown phase that we've been in. But I'd like for us to do this once and do it right, rather than have to come out too quickly and have to do it again, which is I think kind of what we're seeing now. I think Dr. Fauci yesterday was talking about a second wave.
Yeah, it's really scary. As some places are opening, you're seeing these huge cases spike up. Everybody's really worried that we're going to be back here in a month or two. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I wish we could have done it. It's painful. And that's like, folks here, like my opponents are saying that they'll show graphs of the unemployment saying, this is the curve we need to flatten, and, chastising the governor for running the GOP convention off. But, we can help folks replace their livelihood. We can't help them replace their life. Yeah. And it's just unimaginable that 115,000 people dead. And, I don't know. I keep thinking, if the shoe was on, if it was a Democrat in office, what would people be saying if we had 115,000 deaths?
Well, let's see. For 4 deaths, we had Hillary Clinton on in front of Congress for 12 hours for Benghazi. Yeah, it's pretty insane. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, we'll be having hearings for generations if we're going to maintain the same. Yeah, like you said, 4 deaths in Benghazi, which were, any death is unfortunate. That one was. It was a bad situation, and I'm hoping we learned lessons from it. But this whole conspiracy theory notion is, a load of crap. And here we have no kidding, 115,000 people dead.
I got whiplash from how quickly it went from, it's just 2 cases, it's 10 cases, it's 20, to, well, if 100 or 200,000 people died, it's not really that big of a deal. It's like, wow, that changed real quick in a couple weeks. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, taking a victory lap. I think back when it was 110,000, it's like, hey, look at me, what a great job I've done.
Yeah.
It's just hard to fathom.
All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate the conversation. Obviously, I wish you the best of luck. We need more Democrats, especially in North Carolina, would be really good.
Well, thanks, Tate. Have you been here?
Actually, I was 6-7 years ago. I went down to Raleigh, Raleigh.
Raleigh.
Yeah, Raleigh.
You got to come to Asheville. You come here. You may not want to leave.
Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of places I'd like to go right now, but traveling is so difficult. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, this is breweries per capita behind Portland, Maine, and we're working hard to catch up. So
you said brewery. It cut off for a second. You said breweries per capita.
Yes,
gotcha.
We're number 2 behind Portland, Maine. But there's some great breweries, some great restaurants. Mountains are just incredible, beautiful rivers, some great people. So, we have a lot of folks come here and then stay here. So,
all right,
got to come visit.
Well, awesome. Maybe I'll try to stop by on my way to Florida or something sometime, I guess, because I go down to Miami a lot. So thanks a lot for the interview. I really appreciate it. I really do wish you guys the best of luck. You've been one of the coolest people we've talked to so far on here. So thanks a lot for coming on and chatting too.
My pleasure. Hey, thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Stay safe.
Yeah, you too. Have a good one.
Bye.
This was we're done with it now, though. We're done. We're done. The riots are done. The protests are done. There's no more talking now. This was the most that happened.